Welcome to On the Beat, where we bring you a different Buffalo Bills beat reporter every week, exclusively on the Overreaction Sports Network.
Welcome into another edition of On the Beat here on the Overreaction Buffalo Sports Network. We are powered by Believe. I'm excited today. I get to reconnect with an old friend, Mike. But Mike Catalana, the sports director of WHAM in Rochester, also the director of Buffalo Plus, the vidcast podcast those guys put out with Dan Fates, Jenna Cottrell. I mean, we've had Dan and Jenna on. Now we get to have Mike on. We're excited about it. Mike, how you doing, man?
I am doing well. This is a lot of fun for me. I mean, we, go back to that day, those days with the Buffalo Bills and reconnecting now. This is great.
And, we talked about it a little bit off air. Obviously, old dogs, new tricks, this whole digital age of, producing your own shows and putting content out there on YouTube. It's a lot of fun.
I love doing it. You guys do a great job. We're having so much fun. We're talking about the NFL, talking about the Bills. They give us a little bit of freedom. And I was thinking about, I mentioned to you that you were on a show that I hosted how many years ago. That wasn't the digital world. That was the analog world back in the day. And then here we are still talking football 30 years later.
Definitely big cameras and tape drives, man.
Yes.
that was a while ago. But hey, we're going to go ahead and go through the list real quick before we get to Mike and ask him some questions about what went on today. But obviously across the NFL, they made cuts down to 53. And by the way, if you're watching on Facebook Live or on X or Twitter, hop over to YouTube, get in the comments. You got good questions, put them up. And if we like them, we'll talk about them on the show. Also, overreactionbuffalo.com, all your up-to-minute Bills news on that website as well as our content. So hit that up as well. But today, because they don't have two cuts anymore, they have one major cut. We got a long list to go through real fast, but released by the Bills today to get to their initial 53-man roster: defensive tackle Eli Ankou, offensive lineman Keaton Bills and Gunnar Britton, wide receiver Deion Kane, OL Will Clapp, defensive end Cameron Klein, Lyle Collins, the offensive tackle veteran, cornerback to Corey Couch, tight end Zach Davidson, defensive tackle Branson Dean, Ben DiNucci, the quarterback released, offensive lineman Mike Edwards, not safety Mike Edwards, offensive lineman Mike Edwards released, running back Frank Gore Jr., OL offensive lineman Richard Garage, wide receiver KJ Hamler, cornerback Dayquon Hardy, Andy Isabella, the wide receiver, Kareem Jackson at safety, wide receiver Xavier Johnson, Kingsley Jonathan, defensive end, Kenny Lovely, the cornerback, tight end Trey McKitty, wide receivers Terrell Shavers and Justin Shorter, as well as former NCAA champion and world Olympic champion wrestler Gable Steveson, the defensive tackle, also Deshaun Williams, defensive tackle, and safety Kendall Williamson. Long list, Mike. Just your overall feelings about the cuts and the things that were made.
Yeah, Jerry, I would say not major surprises, but a couple of things I think that give you a little insight into what they're thinking. A couple, when I look, I see I know Kareem Jackson came in late, but he's a veteran safety. And that makes me think that, and we've seen them back at practice. You mentioned Mike Edwards, the safety, that those veterans like Mike Edwards and, are going to be ready to go or closer to for the start of the season when they make moves like that. I was a little bit surprised about Dayquon Hardy. I thought they thought more of him as a returner. They ended up making a trade with the Jets to pick up a returner, similar kind of role for a player. That one surprised me a bit. And then, look, when you look at Zach Davidson, he had shown a lot.
Right.
But I said that I think he's on about the worst roster possible to be a pass-catching tight end.
Right.
With the two guys in front of him.
Yep.
We don't know how many of these guys are coming back on the practice squad or could eventually make their way onto the 53. But I don't think there's major surprises. I think it just gives us a little insight into what they think of the rest of the roster.
And I got to ask you this, Mike, and this is the one thing that kind of surprised me, and it just kind of goes to show you no matter how much time you put into analyzing this roster and how much time you look at training camp and guys that are in, guys that are out, and all that, there's still a big emphasis placed on veterans and veteran leadership in the NFL where it fits in and it makes sense. The Buffalo Bills keep Hill, the defensive end, and then they also keep Valdez Scantling at wide receiver, two guys that weren't on the field hardly at all, and they're on this 53-man roster.
Yeah, I think Hill, I was almost, to me, that was maybe a bit of a surprise, but I think they're looking to find ways to get pass rush. He's had some success in the league as a veteran. And then with Scantling, listen, I think Josh likes him. I think he likes the idea of that kind of player. I think he can run down the field. We've seen it. You got to be able to catch the ball. But he can run, and we haven't seen a lot of them. So, I think they went that route. I do believe they feel like they can bring these other receivers back. I would assume, they're going to try to get them, at least a couple of them, including Shavers, back on the practice squad and them have access to them. I think that's another thing, Jerry. The way the rosters have changed with the practice squad makes a massive difference on what a team can do. I was telling somebody today, I'm like, you can have a player who's released today and plays week 1 and another guy who makes the 53 and isn't active. Because, you bring a guy, Ben DiNucci would be a good example. If they brought him back on the practice squad, he's not on the regular roster, but if they don't feel like, their backup quarterback is ready to go, they can activate DiNucci for the game. So, if Trubisky's not ready. So it's a fluid situation with the roster. I think it's better for the game. But sometimes when you look, you say, well, why would they make this move? Or why wouldn't they make that move? Some of it comes down to who they think would get picked up and who they think they could get back on the practice squad.
Well, Mike, you talked about it earlier. You said you mentioned Dayquon Hardy as a guy that you were surprised at. Obviously, a draft pick, a guy that came in from Penn State, a cornerback, but most thought he was brought in to be a returner. You look at the guys released today, all the returners basically from this roster were released. Bills go out and make a trade for cornerback return specialist Brandon Codrington from the Jets. They go interdivision. The Bills get Codrington in the 7th round pick. The Jets get a 6th round pick. Obviously, those guys were here, and you would imagine it was returner first, and then we'll worry about position later. I guess the Bills didn't feel comfortable with their return ability.
Yeah, you're right. That is a surprise because I wasn't on the radar of Codrington. You see some of his highlights from, the preseason, and he looked really good. And I think there was a concern that they didn't have these guys ready. Hamler's done it before. The rules have changed. McDermott even mentioned the other day that Hardy had really improved in his decision-making, but I think they're looking for more of what they consider a sure thing.
Right.
And it is a draft pick. And you know how teams are about their draft picks. But they decided to make this move. I think they like Hardy. I think they're hoping to get him back, but maybe they just didn't feel confident for him, especially in the early part of the year.
I got to ask this, and I have not been to a preseason game live this year, and I know that you have, and I want to ask you this question. What does the kickoff feel like? I mean, is there a lot of energy with it? Is it kind of a dead play? I mean, it went from 11 dudes screaming downfield as fast as they could to this stop and go thing. What is the feeling you get when you're seeing that thing live? I mean, is it still an exciting play, or is it kind of like, can we just get it out to the 25 so we can get on with it?
Honestly, I said when it started, and we had the official at training camp explaining all the rules, and you're like, oh my God, the NFL, they love the rules.
Right.
And I'm thinking this thing is either going to be crazy or it's going to be a dud. And I lean a little bit more to dud. When you're at the game, I honestly, especially in the preseason, you wonder how much people are locked in on it. I think most people are a little stunned when they look at it. I mean, it looks funny on camera. The kicker's all the way down there by himself. That's where kickers belong, right? By themselves.
Exactly.
But then we haven't seen a lot of big plays from it. It does feel more like a scrimmage play. Because it's built that way. It's the players obviously closer together. I think it does change a little bit of roster construction when you think about who you need running down the field. I mean, that's eliminated from the game now because a little bit on the punts, but you got your gunners going down the field. It's that part from the kickoffs where you've got, basically 10, if not 11 guys running down the field is gone in a different way on punts. But I honestly think no one knows. And I think when we get to this first week of the season, there's going to be a team that's got something planned that's going to work. There's going to be a team that's got something planned that nobody sees that's going to be a disaster. I think that's what usually happens. But at the game, honestly, feels like a dud, at least on the kickoffs. I don't think people really know what to make of it yet.
I think it has potential.
Yeah.
But I definitely I felt that way myself. It's just kind of like like whatever, man. It's kind of there. So Mike Catalana joins the sports director at WHAM in Rochester, also Buffalo Plus, their vidcast podcast they do with Dan Fates and Jenna Cottrell, two that we've had on the show. And now we're happy to get Mike on with us. Bills keep 9 offensive linemen. One thing I think was a big story of this training camp, and I think draft picks across the board, even though a couple were released, I think the Bills really liked who they picked, and they hit on some guys. You look at this offensive line, 2 veterans are gone, Lyle Collins and Will Clapp, guys that a lot of people thought might be, backups, solid backups. They keep Van Pran Granger, and then Tylen Grable. Tremendous camp from him, and I think he's got a tons of potential. Obviously got to work on his body, but a lot of confidence in the 2 rookies at the O-line spot.
Yeah, I think you're calling that, well, you would know, and you're calling that right on the money. And they like to try to develop these guys and get them the opportunity. They're pretty happy with Aaron Cromer as the offensive line coach, and I think they feel like they can develop and build the depth that way. It's an easy call. Like Lyle Collins has a lot of experience in this league. When I say easy, it's a simpler call to say, let's stick with the veteran there. That's not what they're doing. They're going to go younger. Doesn't mean they're not going to be out there looking tomorrow. Like, you don't know what they're going to do in terms of maybe somebody who pops up on the waiver wire, maybe just a vested veteran who's out there that they could bring in. But I agree with you. And I think, when you look at those players, especially with Grable, they are excited about his physical, what he can become. And you're right. I think it is a development thing, but I think they're very excited about what they see in him and to build around that. Not every draft pick, like we're just talking about the other ones going, but if they think they've hit it right, especially on the line of scrimmage, I think they're going to want to build.
If an unfortunate event, Mike, of Connor McGovern, he gets hurt and goes out, who gets the ball next? Is it Alec Anderson, or do they have faith in Van Pran Granger to put him in right away?
That's really interesting. I think it would be right now would be Alec Anderson. I mean, he's going to be that eligible 6th lineman. It appears to be the case. I would think they would go there. It was kind of quiet for Van Pran Granger. Got to say that slowly when I say it. During camp, he wasn't talked about a ton. I think they liked what they saw. And before this all started, there was some thought of, hey, to get this kid out of Georgia, he comes in, he shows what he's made of. Maybe McGovern stays at guard and that kind of thing. I don't think that was even considered right away. I mean, the guy's got to build his way onto a roster. But I think if it happens right now, I think it's Anderson. I think because he's been around, and I think he's going to get more playing time. But they certainly have a lot of hope that this is a player that can be at least the backup and, become somebody. You've got to be able to have some versatility too, if you're not one of the starters. So you got to be able to play multiple positions, interior or outside on the tackle spot. So my guess would be Anderson, because we haven't really seen it the other way, but we'll find out. Hopefully not find out. McGovern seems to have really embraced this role, that he's in there and everything's good.
Obviously, the guy from Lancaster, and I said this last show, I'm a Lancaster alum. My house is in Lancaster off of William Street. So I was way excited to see Joe Andreessen make this initial 53-man roster. Now, full disclosure, and I put this out on Twitter, Mike, as a guy that was cut 3 times in the league, I'm gonna let this smoke clear a little bit.
Yeah.
And before I get super excited, how do you see this front office? I mean, especially at the linebacker spot, they let Deion Jones go. They keep Andreessen. There seems to still be maybe some question marks about backups. Morrow was kept on the roster, even though he's kind of fought some injury again, kind of in the same light as Tuhill. You got a veteran that you hopefully can rely on. Is this a spot that maybe the Bills try to find some waiver wire guys, or is, there's some other spots as well you think they might go to?
Yeah, I think there's something about this kid that they really like. Now, to your point, and we said it on the air tonight, they call it the initial 53.
Yes.
And so I was joking with somebody. I said, I'm sure Joe's excited, but he's not popping champagne yet because, you've got to stay on the roster. And
Right.
tomorrow is a huge day. And it may not even always be for that position. If they find somebody that pops out and they put in a claim of somebody they don't expect to get, and they need to put him on the 53. I'm not saying he's the first guy off,
Right.
but that can happen too. And you don't know 3 weeks from now what they're thinking. But when we talk to McDermott about him, they love his instincts. They love his ability to seek out the football. I mean, obviously he played really well in Pittsburgh, appeared to play maybe a little step back, from what he put on tape in the Pittsburgh game. But honestly, Kansas City worked him out before the Bills did. If they had their eye on him, the last thing the Bills need is to put him out there and have him end up with the Chiefs because of the way that can go. But I think they really like him. Now, I'm saying that here, and 24 hours later, it could be different. But they do like that way he plays. They like his ability to call the defense and be that backup guy, and they like him on teams. So he fits right in for now. But with all those guys on the practice squad and all these hundreds and hundreds of guys on the waiver wire, I think you got to take a breath before you really embrace it.
Exactly. And I think, Mike, the big thing about him and, the game he had in Pittsburgh, and then the next week I watched the all 22 of that Carolina game, didn't have a boatload of help up front. I mean, he had guys in his face pretty quick, still made a lot of plays, but maybe not as productive as that Pittsburgh game. But when you look at what the Bills do on defense with this 4-2-5, there's just such a immense amount of responsibility put on that middle linebacker. We saw Terrell Bernard step in last year and just take it over and, put the green dot on his helmet, and just now's a guy that you can't even imagine having to replace, right? I mean, I talked about it not too long ago of the two linebackers, and we're going to find out real quick because obviously he's out for 4 months, but Milano being out to me is not as bad as if Bernard was out. And I think Andreessen has a lot of those similar qualities that Bernard has. They're pretty much the same size. They're twitchy dudes. They're downhill guys, but there's that reliability and leadership about them that just comes naturally. It's not forced.
Yeah, I agree with you.
They really like.
And Bernard last year, I mean, here we are a few weeks before the season, and we're like, who's playing middle linebacker? Because he had not played. I mean, he had been hurt in camp, hamstring, limited time, and they're trying to figure it out. And Tyrell Dodson had spent a lot of time there, and you thought was maybe they're going to go with the veteran. And Sean comes out and says, Bernard. And then he goes and plays, and you watch him, and you're like, his instincts are there. He understands the defense. And I think when you're making a good point, I think they see those similar traits, what they need on the middle. And you're right. And you talk about the 5-2, there are times last year, certainly, when they went with 3 safeties and 1 linebacker, and he's the only one out there, and he's calling that middle. I made an argument that he's the most valuable player on the entire defense. Now,
I agree.
Ed Oliver's very important. Got to get that pressure inside. You always need the corners, but as an individual guy, I thought Bernard, his improvement from year 1 to year 2, and he talks about it, being in the league, like that first year he's swimming and he's trying to figure it out. And then he gets out there, which is the hope for Dorian Williams, that a lot of those things become clearer and clearer because he's going to play. But the role in the middle is important. And I think Andreessen has shown that ability to this point. Now the question is, can he do those other things, be ready, and in case he's needed? Because, we saw what happened at the end of last year. And this is not a homer take. I think if Bernard was healthy and playing, I think they beat the Chiefs in the playoffs.
I agree.
I think that loss was massive for them, and he was trying to get back. And, you know, the other guys did their best, but Bernard is a special player on this defense. And if Andreessen can be that backup for him, I think that's great.
You know, it's funny, Mike, you bring that up, and I agree with you 100%. I think he's the most valuable player on the defense. Talking about Terrell Bernard, obviously he's that leader up front in that front seven. You go back to the safety room. Now you don't have that leadership of Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. Obviously, Cole Bishop trying to get back from injury. Any chance we see him week 1, or do you think this is a maybe week 2, 3, possibly even 4 coming back from the shoulder injury?
It's interesting because of the way the schedule goes too, where you start Sunday, go to Thursday.
Yep.
And you would think maybe not. I also was thinking about Bishop in that role of that third safety at times, that they can get him on the field, maybe for moments when they do. That leadership and everything they've gotten out of the safeties, I mean, look, it's hard to replace what those guys brought to this team. But Rapp is, I think, can be a good player for this team, whether it's Mike Edwards, who's on the other side. I think eventually they want Bishop to have that job. And sometimes, I don't know why it is, Jerry, but we just bypass Taron Johnson sometimes, and he's phenomenal. You know, you think of the front, you think of the linebackers, right, you think of the corners, think of the safeties. Yeah. Oh, yeah, they play in the nickel all the time because they have Taron Johnson,
yes,
who I believe, along with Bernard, are the two leaders on that defense. And this is no slight on the guys who were just there. They were phenomenal leaders. But sometimes, you know, it takes a guy leaving for another guy to allow himself to be more vocal and more of a leader. And I think those two are vital. Taron Johnson and Bernard together. It's just a different type of leadership for the defense this year.
I think Taron Johnson's the best nickel corner in football.
Yeah,
I mean, and obviously his peers think that too, because he's been an All-Pro and a Pro Bowler and everything else. So I think you're dead on with that. You know, kind of staying in that safety room, Mike. And Mike Catalana joins us from WHAM in Rochester, also Buffalo Plus. But when you look at the cuts today, and you look at, like you said it earlier, like veterans at that safety spot, like a Kareem Jackson gone, Kendall Williamson gone, it kind of would lead you to believe that, you know, they're somewhat happy with the room, but Mike Edwards is probably pretty healthy and probably ready to go week 1.
Yeah, he was out there doing warm-ups before the last preseason game in uniform. I think the thought was, and McDermott doesn't usually give you anything on injuries, and he basically said Milano was the only guy who was clearly out. Obviously, they knew that, and the rest of them had a good chance to come back, which is encouraging. I think they feel that way with Edwards. And I think, you know, Kareem Jackson's an interesting guy. I mean, 14 years in the league, and he's out there playing in that last preseason game. Like, he wants to still play, obviously, and you never know. But, you know, releasing him today, to me, that's a little bit of a signal. Not that he came in later, but you know there's guys that you know they've been there. You can trust them on the field. It's the difference between Bishop and Edwards is, you know, both of them missed a ton of time, but Edwards has been there and played in huge games and won 2 Super Bowls. Like, he's been part of that, whereas it's all new for Bishop. But I'm excited to see Bishop play. I just am excited to see what they can do with him. But I said at the beginning of the year, I thought it was going to be Edwards and Rapp, and DeMar stepped up. You know, DeMar's a better player than people outside give him credit for. I think he's probably more suited to be the third safety. I don't know if he's an every down safety for you, but when he had to play this 2 seasons ago, I thought he played pretty well. You're replacing when it's Poyer and Hyde out there. That's tough, but I think DeMar can play, but I do think Edwards is the guy they want to be the starter.
And obviously, Mike, I mean, and you talked about nobody really realizing how good DeMar Hamlin is. I think it's the same thing with Cam Lewis. I mean, I think it was pretty. I think it was pretty indicative of the fact that when his contract was up, they got him done quickly. You know, Cam is a guy that can play safety, but he's also that backup to Taron Johnson. He's a very vital part of this defense as well.
No question. How about 3 UB guys on the team?
I know,
because I love Ingram as a player. I think his size, he's physical. He's got a little bit of an edge to him. I love him as the backup. And on the other side with Kaiir Elam, I mean, you've got bigger, more physical corners. Elam's a different guy this year. I think he's going to be in that role. He's going to play. I mean, they went from last year where we know, like, I don't think John Butler was a fan as the defensive backs coach. And Elam says he didn't lose confidence, but it just was, they didn't trust him. And you got to trust a guy playing corner. And they didn't trust him. Came back this year, new number, new attitude. McDermott said clean slate. And at least now, you know, maybe he's not a starter, but I think they feel much more confident. But, you know, Ingram, I think Ingram's going to be a player in this league. And I think he's certainly going to get time. It need be out there behind Douglas and Benford. So, and I always trust this coaching staff coaching secondary guys. I just think they do a great job. Babbage has done it, certainly McDermott and company, and now with the new coaches in the secondary. So all that's a positive. It's just a matter of getting these guys healthy and on the field.
Yeah, very, very partial to Bobby Babbage Jr., Mike. Full disclosure, his father played at Tulsa, coached at Tulsa, and know that family really, really well. Good people. A bunch of them are still down here in the city of Tulsa, Oklahoma. But couple questions.
Yeah.
I'll give you a question, and then I'll let you tell everybody where they can find you. But
sure,
I do want to go back to this quarterback situation and where we are right now. Obviously, Trubisky, if you watch him, you were there at practice. You saw the fact that he leg brace, not bending the knee. They put him on IR, those types of things. They cut DiNucci. Is this a spot where they're going to try to go out on that waiver wire and get another guy? Obviously, everybody talks about, you know, Josh controlling who he likes around. You know, do you think they'll go ahead and get another guy, or do you think they'll just ride this thing out, get DiNucci back on the practice squad and go with what they got?
So if they were to go out and get another quarterback now, I still think you almost have to bring DiNucci back and put him on the practice squad. You only have a few weeks. He's been around, hasn't been a ton, but he has been around. If you need somebody, you know, those 2 games are coming up fast. I mean, we're a week from Sunday and then the next Thursday. You need a backup. You need somebody active. So even if DiNucci is on the practice squad, you can elevate him if need be. I like Mitch as a player. I just haven't seen it. You don't want to use the backup quarterback. Obviously, you have a quarterback like Josh Allen. But you know, the old saying is, I always push back with people who say to me, well, if something happens with Josh, they're done anyhow. Yeah, you can say that about the Chiefs and the Eagles and the whoever. Like, name a team, right? The 49ers. Like, you can't lose your quarterback. It's not about a season. If he's out 2 games, can you win one of them? Can he do the job? I mean, you're going to try to win all of them. And I would hope Mitch would be there. It's a rather limited sample size when you see him with the ones. He had some opportunities. It wasn't great. But, you know, the issue is now, I mean, that guy's done getting snaps for the most part, right? It's season time now. So the starter's going to get the snaps. So I think they may ride with it this way, depending on how it goes. But they obviously need to get another quarterback in. And I would think, based on the work that's been done, it would be Ben DiNucci, my guess, who comes back on the practice squad.
Mike Catalana joins us. Mike, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you, where they can see you, tell them about the Buffalo Plus vidcast and podcast you guys do, and just let them know where they can get you.
Yeah, well, you already mentioned I'm with Jenna Cottrell and Dan Fates. They're awesome. We cover the teams. We travel every week to the games, whether it's in Buffalo or whether it is on the road. We're on the Buffalo Plus YouTube channel or anywhere you get your podcasts. We talk Bills all the time. I was telling you before we got on, like, during this time, you know, we will do pregame pods, postgame. We will do practice ones during the week. We'll do interviews with reporters from other cities. We have a You Ask, We Answer segment where just take your questions. We're live on Thursday nights. So it's a blast. You know, this is fun to do. It's fun to talk football. This is my 37th year covering the Bills. I was 8 years old when I started. So I like to use that joke. It used to get a bigger laugh. It doesn't anymore. Right. So, but it's been a long time, but I still love it. I love being around. I got 2 great people I work with, so it's a lot of fun.
All right. Last question. I'm going to preface it this way. I brought this up the other day. I'm going to start a movement. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm a Phillies fan. I grew up 40 minutes outside of Philadelphia.
There we go.
I'm still a fan of the Philly teams, even though I played in Buffalo. They're my team, but I do cheer for the Eagles. But I'm a big Phillies fan. They acquired Trey Turner last year, and Trey Turner starts the season in an absolute worst slump of his career. Was batting like .089, was playing horribly, couldn't hit the ball. And Philly fans did something un-Philly-like. Instead of just crucifying this poor guy on WIP every day, they started a movement where they went out, they bought billboards, they put up all these positive "We love Trey Turner" messages on billboards, and then they actually gave him a standing ovation at Citizens Bank Field when he came up. After they did that, he went on a tear and ended up hitting like 300. Obviously, they go to the World Series, they lose. I want to start a movement.
Okay.
But I'm going to have to ask you this question because obviously being on this side of it, there's some questions, Mike, I'm sure you never want to ask, but you got to ask them anyway because that's your job. I want to do this movement for Tyler Bass. I think the first game of the season, we should stand up and give him a standing O and give him some love. But real quick, I mean, obviously he struggled a little bit this preseason, still raw off the end of last season, missed kick in the playoffs. I don't foresee any movement there. Anything you've heard or you've seen that maybe would lead to something else?
No, I wouldn't be stunned if they brought a kicker onto the practice squad, because you never know if you have to make a move. They may want to have somebody in or they just wait. They didn't bring anybody in for camp. So He was alone. And, listen, this kid has been a really good kicker, but something happened about midseason last year and it just wasn't right. And you can look at numbers, you can look at those things. We're watching him at practice. He just doesn't look the same. And I think he's healthy. And it's funny you say that about the standing ovation. In Philly with Trey Turner, and they signed him to this huge long-term deal. They needed him.
Yes.
He had been a great player.
Yes.
Maybe, Tyler Bass had been a hell of a kicker.
Yes.
And then it just went south for him. Not totally, because this league. Like if it went totally south, he would have been gone. Like that's the way you've got to operate.
Right.
So I think they still have a level of faith in him, but maybe he does need that. So, if the fans respond to him, I haven't heard when you're at a game, I don't hear it as much.
Right.
I'm sure online there's a lot, but he's got to, Sean said it the other day, got to make that kick. Like, this business, and especially for a kicker, it's like, make the field goals, and 50 yards is the old 40. Like these guys can boom them. So maybe a standing O. How about that for the opening game when he's ready for the kickoff? If he knows it's for him, you never know what gets in a guy's head. Maybe this gets it out of his head, whatever is going on.
Outstanding, Mike. Man, we really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on with us. So hopefully we'll have you on later in the season. We'll talk about what's going on during the regular season, and hopefully it's going well. But thanks for taking the time to be on with us, and hope to talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Go Phillies. We'll talk World Series when they're in it this year.
Yes, we will. And as always, folks, check us out on YouTube. You can get us on our pods tomorrow. Hit the like button, subscribe button. Tell your friends we're making a run to 2,000 before the start of the season. We appreciate you as always. Much love, and go Bills.
Welcome to On the Beat, where we bring you a different Buffalo Bills beat reporter every week, exclusively on the Overreaction